podcast starts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to And Now the Podcast Starts, a show which talks about horror, cinema and anything related that takes the interest of my wonderful co-hosts or myself. I'm TD Velasquez, but you can call me Dan, in Greater Manchester, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by...
Kirsty Warrow. In Shropshire still. Not gone anywhere.
Yes, well, I'm that's one of the things I'm very glad about. How are you this week, Kirsty?
I'm good. A little bit colder. But yes, no, pretty good, thank you.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up for me as well. Overall, I suppose. Okay, so just to let the listener know, the main feature of today's episode will be a recorded chat between Stella and myself from last October, in which we give non-spoiler reviews of 5 newish horror feature films which we saw at Grimmfest in Manchester. Some of these films are now on wider release in the UK, and we'll give details of where to find them at the end of the episode. But first, let's deal with the present day. This week in the UK, we've been given some confusing instructions by our government to go back to work if we can't work from home, but also not to go back to work if that's difficult. Luckily, I mean, I'm working from home anyway, as such, being a carer. I imagine that's muddled the waters for you a little bit, though, Kirsty.
Yeah, obviously the government have said 1st of June as a potential return date for, some school children, which would include some of the ones that I teach. But it's just very uncertain. There's not an awful lot of guidance at the moment about how that's going to happen. So, so there's some thinking and talking and planning to be done in the next few weeks.
Yes, and all of that sounds marvellous fun.
Oh, indeed.
As always. Well, hopefully we'll still have horror and horror adjacent things to kind of keep us in high spirits.
Yes.
Or slightly high spirits. What have you had on your mind recently?
Well, there's a couple of pieces of kind of horror and horror adjacent news that have come out from the entertainment world in the last couple of days. So I'm just looking at the moment. 36 minutes ago, at the point of which I'm saying these words, Neil Gaiman on his Facebook has published a cast list for the audio version of his Sandman graphic novels, which were kind of cult graphic novels from the early 2000s, sort of focusing on these big kind of mythic elemental kind of characters, James McAvoy playing the central character, Neil Gaiman on board himself as the narrator. I quite enjoy listening to him talk, so that'll be good. And my favourite character in the whole franchise is the kind of slightly kind of punky, gothy, female death character who's, I'm quite pleased to see Kat Dennings has been cast as Death. Oh, and Michael Sheen, God love him, is playing Lucifer. So that looks, and other names as well, Taron Egerton, Samantha Morton, Riz Ahmed, Andy Serkis. So an all-star lineup for that one. So that's quite exciting.
Pretty amazing.
If you're a Neil Gaiman fan, as I am.
I am too. I have read the first Sandman graphic novel.
Yeah.
And it's kind of wonderful stuff. I'm sort of aware of a lot of his other things, but I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge. For instance, I'm aware that there've been audio and also TV adaptations of his work quite regularly over the last couple of years. So we've had Good Omens, and which is Terry Pratchett as well as Gaiman, but and also American Gods on TV, and also Good Omens was on the radio, and so was Neverwhere, which also starred James McAvoy in the radio version. Is the audio version of the Sandman from the same stable as those? So
I'm not sure. They're putting it out through Audible.
I would say yes then.
Yes.
Because the BBC radio version of Neverwhere was written and directed by Dirk Maggs, who now works with Audible and does all of their Alien universe material and their X-Files stuff. So I think it probably is him given that track record. And I know that those are the kind of actors
it
he
is.
liked
I've
working with.
just managed to get a link to a Hollywood Reporter who is, talking about it, executive produced by Dirk Maggs. So you were right.
Right, yeah. He's very good at what he does, so that will be great. And although I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of adapting, a graphic novel, comic strip to the radio or to the audio medium, because it's a completely different medium sensorily, and you have that choice of, do you either transform the material so that it entirely stands on its own in the new medium, or do you kind of somehow make a soundtrack to the comic? I like the idea of reading along the book while listening to the audio, but I don't know whether that will be something that they'd encourage.
Well, I think, that there's a rich tradition, Daniel, as I'm sure you are aware of, sort of having slightly different versions of, a narrative across different medium. Dan and I are both big fans of Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which, did that rather well. And, there's that kind of sense of that, what the canon is sort of, a little bit kind of wibbly wobbly.
Oh yeah, there's always room for a multiplicity. And by the way, Dirk Maggs also did Hitchhikers. That
does not surprise me. Yeah, does not surprise me.
Series are all him. No, I just find myself wondering, because I mentioned that Dirk's other productions include the Alien franchise audios that Audible do, and some of those are based on literary fiction novels, but some of them are based on graphic novels. And I know that I haven't done it, but I've heard from some fans that, for instance, last year's one, which was William Gibson's Alien 3, it was the original script of the movie Alien 3, which was adapted last year into both a graphic novel and an audio. And I know that some fans have kind of listened to the audio while reading the graphic novel. So you get the two things work together, and apparently it works quite well.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if they encourage that kind of approach. But I know that the Sandman as a movie and a TV show has been in kind of development hell for a very long time.
Yes, so long.
It's about time that something was made of it. And maybe, as with, Good Omens, the radio or audio version will kind of kickstart a visual adaptation.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, so I've got some other news as well, which is again related to kind of horror franchise. Last week, basically there had been for a while some talk about a Clarice Starling television series.
Oh, right, okay.
Which now seems like it's a goer. They've cast a former Home and Away actress called Rebecca Breeds in the lead role as Clarice Starling. I've got to be honest, as a Hannibal fan, I'm not quite sure what I think about that. Just because.
So, are we to assume that it is not related to the Hannibal series?
It is not related.
Oh, okay.
So basically. And this is kind of quite interesting from at least a kind of industry point of view. So when Brian Fuller and NBC were doing Hannibal, there was obviously a lot of kind of talk and speculation about at what point would Clarice Starling be kind of folded into the the kind of version of Thomas Harris's stories that Brian Fuller was telling. And Fuller himself said, kind of quite a few times that he would really like to do that. But what was strange about it is that the Dino De Laurentiis company, who owned the rights for kind of Hannibal and those characters, they didn't own the rights for Clarice Starling.
Oh, okay.
So they couldn't leave. They were trying to, kind of do a deal so that she could be included. It's a bit like the, Spider-Man and MCU thing.
Sure, yeah.
So they were trying to do a deal where she could be included, but they never kind of got to do it. And what Brian Fuller said that he wanted to do, or he would have done had she been able to be included, is that he would have cast a kind of young woman of colour in that role, rather than kind of the kind of Jodie Foster, Julianne Moore, which would have been really, really interesting. And so this new television series, which is obviously in development as much as anything can be in development right now, is again, she's nothing. I don't know Rebecca Breeds, but she's a young Caucasian actress. So it's a little bit disappointing on that kind of representation front that they've not gone with a sort of slightly edgier choice.
Sure,
but only because that's what Fuller would have done. And so it'll be interesting to see how that as a television series develops, and to what extent does it connect to any other previous versions, or if it's just completely fresh.
Yes, I mean, presumably Hannibal Lecter might be in it as a character.
I don't know. I'm not sure. So, but it'll be interesting to keep an eye on. Because she's such an iconic character, and there are so many now, and particularly in kind of crime fiction, aren't there? Kind of female-led shows, but probably because Clarice Starling exists, or at least in part because she exists. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. But
I'd heard slightly differently about their intentions for Clarice had they been able to include her in Hannibal. I had heard that an intention would have been to cast Ellen Page.
That's yeah.
I put that down to one of the main directors and producers of Hannibal was David Spade.
Oh yes,
who directed Ellen Page's first movie, Hard Candy.
Yes.
So there's a pre-existing relationship there.
Yeah, no, I'd not heard of that actually. So that's a new one for me. But yeah,
it still wouldn't have had that kind of ethnic change, which would make it edgier. But at the same time, Ellen Page is just quite an interesting performer, and I think that would have been worth seeing. But
yeah,
in any case, I'm kind of sad that what's being done now isn't related to Hannibal. But we'll get into that in a future episode, I think.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I still haven't seen, as we speak, I haven't watched the third series of Hannibal. So I still haven't seen the whole series.
Okay, so that's the more bonkers one.
That's possibly why I've not watched it. I've kind of heard mixed things about it, but I do want to see it because I loved the first two series so much. By the way, just quickly, but because it relates to something we mentioned in our first episode, I've now seen Alex Garland's Devs, which is currently available on the BBC iPlayer.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth mentioning because I think it's not even really horror adjacent, although it does have that uncanny valley quality that we were talking about in some of the strangeness of the kind of moving scientifically beyond the bounds of what we understand as reality. And it also had a moment in it that made me think of your conception that you've discussed of kind of aesthetic horror. There's the sequence early in the series where a character immolates themselves, and which is obviously a pretty horrific thing, but most of what you see on the screen is through CCTV footage of the incident.
Yeah.
So you just get this kind of billowing white flame, and it has kind of negative emotional impacts because you're empathising with the people who knew that character and who are watching the screen. But also the visual quality of it is just is kind of transcendently beautiful in a very strange way.
Yeah, it is. It's not a spoiler to talk about that because that's the kind of catalyst event for the whole series, isn't it? But I just, I think I also finished it this week, and myself and my husband, we both just sort of sat there and went, wow. It's so, the transcendental kind of descriptor I think is really apt. We were both we went into the kind of last episode kind of going, I hope that it does, kind of has a finite ending. So many, television shows sort of so clearly set themselves up for a continuation, renewal with the network. And I kind of felt that it did have a finite ending, but there was maybe some space to come back. But I'm not sure I want that to happen. I don't know. It was satisfying. As an experience just by itself.
Yes, it was. And I think it had the kind of satisfying ending, which is that you're happy that the book is over or whatever, but you are left in a position where you can imagine things, future developments for the characters. But those are the kind of things which I think are probably better in your head than if they made a second series to explore.
Oh, yeah.
So I hope it's fine. It has been mooted that apparently Alex Garland liked working with the cast so much that he'd like to make another series with the same cast but which wasn't connected.
Oh, okay.
So they're all playing different characters.
Well, yeah, and I think, again, so we're not with horror, Dan, but I think one of my first reaction at the end of the film, at the end of the television series, was I really need to write about this, and I also really need to write about it and think about it in relation to his first film, Ex Machina, because there's a very clear link. I think they're lovely inverse companion pieces in that they're about the same idea but inverted, but sort of reflected in each other.
I think you're quite right, and just to kind of pull this discussion a little bit back to relevance to horror, I do think both Ex Machina and Devs are terrifying at points.
Oh yeah.
There's a great deal of tension in Devs. Ex Machina has two kind of poles of weird terror to it, which is one is the kind of android characters and just the way they're depicted visually and the way they act and the strangeness of the fact that as a viewer you can't quite process whether they're human or not or how you should feel about them. But then there are also kind of explosions of violence and things and threat that kind of permeate the action. I definitely feel certainly Ex Machina is horror adjacent, and Devs is like a muscular thriller really with transcendental moments.
Yeah.
But it's definitely gripping, and I'd recommend it highly.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just a special shout out to Sonoya Mizuno, who's in both, and who's quite sort of, she particularly impressed me with Devs because of her very quiet and restrained performance in Ex Machina.
I'd forgotten she was in Ex Machina.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to forget as well because she's, kind of so different, both kind of physically and also just in, kind of the type of character she's playing.
To be honest, I'd not forgotten. I didn't know she was in it. I've seen the film.
Yeah.
I assume she's the dancing robot.
Yes,
okay.
She is.
Wow. No, so any listeners who've not seen Devs, go check it out. Absolutely, I'd recommend it. Certainly to science fiction fans, but anyone who likes a good kind of edgy thriller, really, as well. It's got that in it, and just really beautifully made and full of cinematic kind of awe that is generated in kind of the best science fiction, I think. Which is not the genre that this podcast's about.
No.
So that's been a bit of a digression. But anyway, so I think what we shall do now is segue into our main feature. Stella and myself discussing the feature films we saw at Grimmfest in Manchester back in 2019. Please, a note to the listener, we do play clips from trailers for all the films that we saw, except for Why Don't You Just Die, because that trailer is in Russian. And basically, I didn't think that would work very well on an audio podcast aimed at an English-speaking audience. But apart from that, hopefully you'll get a good sense of each movie and, I'll hand over to my past self and Stella to talk more about those. Kirsty and present-day me will be back at the end to give information about where you can find some of the films and also to do our usual round of horror recommendations for the week. So, over to the past. Okay, so here we are with our post-Grimmfest discussion. Hello, Stella.
Hi, Dan.
Hello. And this is wonderful because this is the second year that we've been to Grimmfest. And the trouble with Grimmfest is it's loads of fun, but you don't really get time to talk about films because they throw so many films at you.
So many films at you.
Yes, and there's no real time for food or thought. It's about time to go to the loo in between some of the films, and that's about it really for the whole day. So if you don't come supplied with your own little provisions to get you through the whole day.
A special horror picnic.
Yes, which I think is essential. It might be nice to talk about Grimmfest for a minute for people who've not been. Grimmfest is the big Manchester festival of fantastic films that happens every year in October, although Grimmfest, or the organisation, I think it's called Grim Up North.
Yes.
They organise kind of little events, smaller events, screenings and things kind of throughout the year.
Yeah.
So this is my third Grimmfest event because I went to the main Grimmfest with yourself last year, and then in June they did a Hammer Films double bill screening in Stockport. I think they do regular screenings at the Stockport Plaza.
They do at the Plaza. It's not monthly, but it's not far off.
All right, okay.
So if you go on their website, they have a good list of what they're going to show over the next few months.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
definitely worth checking out. And the Plaza's beautiful as well. It's worth going there.
It's a really beautiful, old-timey,
Yeah.
well, theatre.
It's even got one the old school organ down the front for playing
Yes.
along to silent movies.
Palladium is the word that I
That's
was
the
looking
word.
for. Yeah. And I have been to a few classic film screenings there, and the organ does come up. They usually show a few old-timey short films
Yeah.
or adverts or things to get you into the mood. And then the organ comes up and they have a little bit of a play along, and then the movie plays, and
Yeah.
it's a great experience all around.
My friends got married there as well, and they had the organ, and that was odd.
I also had friends who got married there.
But,
Yeah,
It's a thing.
it is, and it's a lovely wedding venue. I don't know about your friends, but my friends Ross and Laura got married there, and when we turned up, they've done out the kind of notice board at the front of the cinema, so it says screening today, Ross and Laura's wedding.
Yeah,
all
they
that
did
kind
that
of
as well.
stuff.
Yeah, I
so-
remember.
But basically, Grimmfest, the full festival is 4 days long. Thursday, Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday all day. Both times we've only been able to do this Saturday, really.
Yeah,
And we've had to leave before the last film
yeah.
because of the logistics of buses home and things like that. But it's well worth going along. I really wanted to go back on the Sunday to catch a couple more films, but ended up not doing. Thinking it's a bit too much of an
Doing
effort.
something else.
I got my fix of a little extra horror by going to see Ready or Not in Oldham instead,
Oh, right.
which is
Any good?
marvellous fun.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm pleased to say. Yes, I would recommend it to anyone who likes the horror film and kind of slightly comedic, slightly Evil Dead-ish horror
Yeah.
film. But also I would say do not watch the trailer under any circumstances, because I watched it after I saw the film. It's like, oh, that's showing the best bits of the film.
Oh.
You're like, not just like out of context, but enough so you can grasp. And so avoid the trailer, but it's great fun. Watch.
Watch the film.
Yeah, so random mention of film we're not talking about. So today we'll talk about the 5 feature films and 9 short films that we saw last Saturday, which was the 5th of October 2019. And all of these films have not yet got a wide release
No.
in this country. Some of them have got releases coming up. We'll mention that as we go film by film through. So we'll start with the film that basically the avalanche of horror on Grimmfest Saturday begins at 10:30 in the morning. So,
In the AM, yeah.
so there's a breakfast horror film, and this year it was Tone Deaf, written and directed by Richard Bates Jr., which was an interesting movie to start the day with. I'll give us a plot summary, which is read straight out of the Grimmfest programme, to just give you an idea what kind of movie it is. It's an American film, and here's the plot. A young woman decides to spend a few quiet days in the countryside after losing her job and having her latest complicated relationship implode. Unfortunately, the old-fashioned widower she rents a house from is in the middle of a psychopathic breakdown.
Yay.
Yes, otherwise it would be boring.
I've lived a good life. I've done it all except for one thing. I don't know how it feels to kill someone. It's an itch I never got around to scratching.
You're firing me? Can you at least let me go at the end of the week? Come on, it's almost free lunch Friday. I deserve that meal.
Please don't make me call security.
Need to get out of the city for a bit. Consider this your eat, pray, love moment.
Well, I hope you have a lovely stay. Don't hesitate to call me if you need anything. I'm just down the road.
I'm gonna text you the address. If you call and I don't pick up, I'm being objectified and tortured by a hillbilly.
I didn't really think this through. It just gets easier and easier. Man can only take so much before he cracks.
Is that a tomahawk? Textbook cultural appropriation, man. Jesus.
This movie began one of the several themes of the day, which I identified as the dangers of Airbnb.
Yes.
That came through quite a lot. Although I don't, she does use Airbnb to find the place, but obviously with it being a film, they can't show Airbnb, so they mocked up a website, which is clearly Airbnb, but they've changed the name. I think it was called R&R.
R&R, that's it, yes.
Yeah.
To go and get some R&R. So what's R&R? Rest and recuperation?
Yes.
Yes.
Rest and recreation.
Recreation.
As our American cousins call it. So,
but in the film, of which there was none.
Yes, that's true. No recreation. I'm going to ask you, Stella, if you don't mind, I'll put you on the spot. How did you react to Tone Deaf?
Well, I think we're going to start our film discussion here by disagreeing.
All right.
Because I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
It's kind of playing with the slasher, home invasion, hillbilly hick subgenres. I thought it was set up really, really well. I did feel sympathy with the girl. And I think altogether it was put together very well. There was some talking straight to camera moments from the wonderful Robert Patrick, which I really enjoyed.
Yes, Patrick plays the noted psychopathic landowner.
Yeah, the
in the plot.
old-fashioned guy is having a...
Looking shockingly old, although probably...
We're
that is
shockingly old.
Well, yes, exactly. It probably is just his real age. I suddenly realised it's even 20 years since he was in the X-Files.
Yes.
You know, so he's not going to look the same anymore.
Yeah, well, while in my head he still looks like the handsome Terminator 1000 from
Yes.
T2, but he definitely did look like your granddad, which is fine. But yeah, I thought overall it was really good. I think it probably could have been a bit more tense in places. Like it was trying to be really tense, but I didn't feel the tension. Maybe that was because they offset it with quite a bit of comedy. There was one particular scene that I found difficult to watch.
Oh, yes.
Basically, the girl, she wears contact lenses. I wear contact lenses. There's a spider mistaken for a contact lens incident, and I'm terrified of spiders. And she puts said spider far too close to her eye. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm a horror fan. I'm a horror scholar. But that was one of the few things where I sat in the cinema and I had to close my eyes and look away and go, no.
Oh, dear, oh, dear. No, I mean, I agree. Although I'm also a contact lens wearer. Although not right now. And I remember thinking, if I picked up a thing that I thought was a contact lens and it was a spider, I'd realised before I put it in my eye.
Maybe she's just really, really short-sighted.
Well, no, yeah, maybe, and has limited feeling in her fingertips. I don't know. So,
but yeah, overall, I really enjoyed that film, and you weren't so enamoured.
Well, I think I'm going to surprise you. Actually, I did like it. I might have seemed a little bit annoyed with some of it, but
what annoyed you?
Well, it's just that I think mainly that the tone kept shifting so much. You know, it's that it's now it's tense and frightening. Now it's doing a joke.
Right.
Now Robert Patrick is monologuing to the camera.
Yeah.
And there are some kind of setups where you could kind of see the punchline coming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are also some not. There was that fabulous, totally random scene where she basically goes out driving near to the place where she's rented, and she's trying to find shops and things, and she ends up going to a place which says car wash on
The
it.
car wash.
And has this random encounter with a very strange pseudo car wash attendant that goes in an unexpected way, and then turns out, without spoiling it, turns out to be something that has no impact on the plot or anything. But it's a wonderful little scene that kind of has a marvellous punchline to it. And I thought there was lots of stuff like that in it. And I would say as well, by the way, Robert Patrick is also the producer, I think. He was listed as one of the producers. I wonder if some of his money was in the production, because it is a great role for him. And I think he loved it. And by the way, it's also, he just has so much to say in it. You know, it's probably got more lines in this film than any film in his career. You know, it's all right being a terrifying, mostly silent villain, like in Terminator 2, but actors like to speak and say stuff, you know, occasionally, and that was really good.
I think you're absolutely right with that, though, that you could see how much Patrick was enjoying himself. If he really got stuck in, and I think, that was it. That was enjoyable to watch how much fun he was having.
Yeah, definitely. And I should say as well, I don't think she'll be mentioned much, but I think the actress who played the lead is Amanda Crew, and she is great. She looks a lot like the kind of typical gorgeous, skinny actress that a lot of these kind of movies at this budget level have. And in a way you can get a bit fed up of that, because it makes it feel it's like a stock thing that you just constantly fed. However, I thought she was great, and I thought she had the comic timing to carry the comedic.
Yeah,
bits.
she carried it.
But also I did care about her, you know. There are sequences in the film where she's put in a level of physical peril, which I was on the edge of my seat. And did fear for her. Another bit that I think is worth mentioning is that it starts off with a flashback sequence in which her father, played by Ray Wise, kills himself, and this trauma kind of informs the rest of her life. And then he appears in a dream sequence later on, and that's hilarious.
Oh, the acid sequence.
Yes, yeah.
I think if I'm going to have any problem with the movie, it would be the acid sequence, because it's not like that when you take acid.
Right, okay.
She had such literal lucid hallucinations where she was, and I think she termed it as well, my acid dream.
Right.
And it's like, I think you're pushing the power of the hallucinogen there. Okay. And when the father does appear to her in that sequence.
Because that's interesting. I'd forgotten it was an acid trip. I just thought it was a dream sequence.
She was finding out what it was like. That would be my only issue with it, really, that I felt that the acid sequence was, you wouldn't see that.
I think it's one of those things that's used as a device.
For sure. Yeah.
It's kind of a lazy device almost, really.
Yeah.
And you know, I wouldn't normally give a filmmaker credit for leaning on something, except that the stuff that Ray Wise does and says in the sequence is really funny.
Yeah.
So, you know, I thought that was fine. My main issue with the film, honestly, is the title. We didn't talk about this on the day, because we didn't have time. So it'd be interesting to see what your take on it is. But it's called Tone Deaf because she is tone deaf, although she's a pianist, but she's pretty terrible. And it kind of is a theme throughout the film that she sits down to play the piano, and it obviously gives her a lot of pleasure, but it sounds awful. But I just remember thinking, but it doesn't sound like she's trying to play a tune, but playing it really badly. It just sounds like she's someone who has no musical knowledge, sitting at a piano and going, just hitting keys.
Just having a go.
And no one's ever kind of corrected her on what happened in her piano lessons.
Who was a piano teacher?
So I just thought, that's not strong enough to kind of hang the structure of the whole film on. It's not really...
Yeah.
So does that seem a fair point?
Yeah, I think so.
But I think maybe it stands as a metaphor for the film, because the film does have this wildly fluctuating tone, and therefore maybe it is a bit tone deaf, and you've got to, if you accept that and go with it, though. And this is a comparison that occurred to me at the time. I'd just seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is going to be quite a fatuous comparison, probably, but I saw Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood quite late, because it came to the Heaton Moore Savoy, which gets films a couple of months late usually, which is good because you can go and see good films in a nice cinema, aren't it? At a reasonable price.
Without other people there.
But that was a film that I kind of really didn't enjoy, and I'm still trying to work out why I didn't enjoy it, because it's got loads of good reviews. But I think one of the main problems is that it's a bit all over the place, and it's really long. So even though the scenes in it are generally quite good, or they contain really good things, everything about it is just drawn out so much that it kills the timing, it kills the comic timing.
Yeah.
And unless you're in the mood, which I don't blame people if they are, to just watch a film where you just kind of let it wash over you and can take ages with it, I found it really irritating. Tone Deaf, in a way, I found was just as messy as that movie, but because it was really pacey. I mean, the whole film is like 90 minutes.
Less, 87 minutes.
Right,
so,
okay.
yeah.
So, and so it never tried my patience in the same way. And if there was a scene which I thought was really specious, then I would kind of go for a second. But then there'd be another scene that was good, like almost immediately.
Yeah.
So I also think maybe the kind of to camera stuff doesn't entirely work. I think that's a device that you have to really earn.
Yeah.
And I think it was nice to see, like Robert Patrick monologuing, but I think you've got to be careful in how you set those things up. I'm not sure it entirely worked, but that's not to say that some of those scenes weren't funny. Or,
so it's almost like, what are they doing with those two camera scenes? Are they telling us that the characters know that we're watching, or because if the guy Robert Patrick character, he's set up as having a mental break, would it have been better if he was just muttering to himself about these things rather than talking to us because you knew we were there?
It raises the question of what does it add to our understanding of the characters in the world, because if it was only Patrick's character who did that, fair enough to a point, because you could imagine that maybe it was part of his paranoia. But other characters later do it as well, without spoiling anything. So, and that's kind of, it's like Patrick doing it is the setup for a gag, the payoff of which is other characters doing it later on. But I also kind of thought that's not enough really to justify breaking the fourth wall like that. But no, overall I did enjoy the film, and I think it was a good time. And if it's on somewhere near you and it's affordable, then check it out. Yeah. I do want to mention as well that it was nice to see a brief cameo appearance by Ray Santiago, who I very much enjoyed in Ash vs Evil Dead. So that was how we felt about Tone Deaf. I think it was quite a fun start to the day.
It was.
And then the next film on the bill, just after lunch, not that we had a lunch break, was Why Don't You Just Die? Or, should I try and pronounce this? Papa Stokny, which is Russian.
I don't know. Papa Stokny.
Stokny.
Butchering that there, sorry.
So it's a Russian film directed by Kirill Sokolov, who turned up. He wasn't there in person, but he did an on-camera introduction to the film in English.
Oh, he did, yeah. I enjoyed that. I thought that was a nice little touch for us.
Yeah, and it was just, I was charmed by him immediately, and it put me in a place to enjoy the film. It's fair to say that this was one of my favourites of the day.
Should we look at the synopsis?
Yes, can you give us a read of that, please, Star?
Andre, a detective and the world's most horrible father, brings together a terrible group of people in his apartment. His resentful actress daughter, an angry thug and a cheated cop. Each one of them has a reason to want revenge.
Yes. It's an intriguing setup from that. And I think the way it develops, though, is great because it's even more surprising than that. That description kind of makes it sound a bit formal, but it's more like a collision of random characters impacting on other characters, and that brings them all to this apartment.
It's woven together very, very well. Yeah. And I think of the day, I would say that was my favourite of the day, favourite film of the day.
It's not my favourite, but it's definitely it's one of my two favourites. So I thought, and possibly the best crafted film of the day, while also just being hugely enjoyable. Yeah. The fact that it starts off with this character Matt Faye, who's this young lad wearing a wonderful Batman hoodie.
Batman hoodie from Primark.
It's got it's the 1989 Batman logo. I remember on his hoodie. That was what struck me straight away. And he just goes to this apartment, but he's got a hammer in his hand, or secreted inside his hoodie. Which it brings us to the second theme of the day, which was hammer violence.
Hammer violence. There was a lot.
Yeah.
We should have counted how many people got bludgeoned to death by hammers over the 14 hours that we were sat there.
Should really have had a hammer count.
Yes, next year.
The week before this, I also saw the newest Rambo film, Rambo Last Blood, which really isn't terribly good, but
it was never going to be good.
No, it was never going to be good, which is why I was only vaguely disappointed by it. I knew what I was getting, and I wanted copious violence, and I got a fair old amount of violence, quite a lot of which was committed with a hammer. So, and then, but this takes hammer violence and just violence in general to another level, really.
Yeah, but it wasn't. Some of it was comedic, but it wasn't slapstick. So it was very, very realistic violence. It was really. It was, but I still wouldn't say it was like, what's the word? I wouldn't say it was splatter. I wouldn't say it was slapstick. It was just properly balls out violence.
Yes, I mean, I think it's so violent that the film asks you or makes you ask on a few occasions, could a person really survive this? But it's more like no, because they don't. But there's kind of very drawn out death and unexpected characters not being quite dead at certain points and things like that.
Those aspects of it, of people not being quite dead and people of characters taking more and more things being done to them with hammers and with drills and with TVs. I thought that was going to be death by TV at the start, but it shifted. It was taking a bit from torture porn, I think, because it was so realistically graphic that it felt at times like we were leaning into a bit of torture porn, but then also leaning into a bit. It felt like a western at times. I mean, I know the score sort of gave that feel to it.
It really did, yes.
It was using music that sounded to me a lot like. I mean, it says here in the Grimm guide that sort of nods to Tarantino. So the little western sounding hooks that Tarantino uses in the Kill Bill movies, for example.
Yes,
we were hearing. So it felt.
I think the use of music in the film generally was kind of bravura.
Yeah,
and the way they shot the action in this tiny apartment space,
a very tiny
as
space,
much as you could within that tiny space. You had that kind of Wild West feeling almost of like two characters standing on the opposite side of the space, like almost a shootout kind of thing. Yeah, and they used every single little bit of the space. Yeah. So it's set in a Russian apartment in Russia, curiously enough, and these apartments, they're not very big, and it used that to good effect, I think. There's basically 3 rooms, aren't there? There's the living room, there's a room off to one side, and there's a kitchen, and you don't really see the other rooms. There's a bit where somebody gets smashed through the wall in the fight. And the bathroom, yeah, that's right. Now that you've mentioned torture porn, I feel like you're quite right to say that, and it makes me feel like I should kind of de-trigger it because, I think that is a genre which has limited appeal. And like, for instance, if I had not seen the film and somebody described it as being a bit torture-porny, I would probably steer clear of it.
Right.
But I think that the movie has this structure whereby characters arrive at this apartment, and then you have a flashback which kind of explains more about them.
Yeah.
And in a way, it keeps identification with the characters, and it keeps them charming or interesting to an extent that you're not just watching them suffer, and you can both care about them, but also laugh at the kind of farcical nature of the situation. Like,
yeah, definitely a farce. The escalating, this is just getting worse and worse, and nobody's looking good.
Yeah, and then
at the end
like,
of this.
you know, things like, for instance, there's a whole sequence about a character is handcuffed in the bathroom and is trying to work out how to open the handcuffs. And the comedic play that comes out of whether the character will be able to get out of the handcuffs is really well done.
Are you going to mention the plug hole?
No. The plug hole is like guaranteed to elicit a reaction from the audience. But yeah, I'd forgotten about that, to be honest.
You lock that away in a recess of your mind that you don't want to think about it again.
Yes, oh dear. And you know, the whole thing is done with a kind of charm. Like, even, I mean, the synopsis here describes Andre as the world's most horrible father, and he is horrible in general, but he's also quite charming.
He is quite charming.
He is resented by family members and friends alike for various reasons, and some of that is justified. And he's kind of self-interested a little bit as well, but he's also...
Well, he's a cop. He's a detective, isn't he?
Yes.
So it seems that he's a cop and a detective at home as much as he is at work. So I imagine that would be quite difficult to live with.
Yes.
Anyway.
But at the same time, this film kind of confronts him with the consequences of decisions he's made in the past. And
the whole film could have just been called Consequences.
Well, yeah, exactly. Everything kind of locks together beautifully, really. It's such a cleverly structured script, and really tightly realised. And I think you can sort of sympathise a little bit with Andre in his kind of exasperation and his sense that, oh no, you know, this has happened, I should have known, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really liked that, and I really liked the fact that everything in it was kind of purposeful.
Yes.
It didn't feel like it wasted any time. There was one bit which I can only vaguely say with that because I don't want to make it into a spoiler, but there's a bit where there is discussion of child abuse, and I kind of thought, I don't want this film to go in that direction, because I could already tell from the tone of the film, even though it's very violent and things, but it's kind of too light-hearted to play around with that.
Yeah.
But the film knows how to deploy that card in a way that later on it all kind of fits together.
Yeah.
And I was really pleased by that. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
And I think I did read a review by Kim Newman where he said, in theory, you could remake this in English and not change anything, but there is something about the nature of the setting which kind of informs the characters
for sure
a little bit, and the tone, and it just made me think, I don't want them to remake it in English. I just want them to release it properly or make it kind of widely known. You know, every now and then you do get a breakthrough foreign language film.
Yes.
I fear that this is just too violent to really be that. It's not going to win any mainstream awards, but it's wonderful, really. So.
It's a film as well. I know it's a horror-based podcast, and this was a horror weekend. It would be a film that I would recommend to people who are not horror fans.
Yeah, it's not a horror film,
but it's not, it's not going to frighten anyone.
No, it's a very violent black comedy. I mean, the comparison with Tarantino is appropriate.
Yeah,
I think on that level.
I also felt it a bit echoed Danny Boyle's work a little bit as well, particularly Trainspotting.
Oh, okay.
I think maybe it was the colour palette, or just the way some of the, actually again I can't really say without giving it away, but yeah, sometimes I felt a bit Trainspotting-y at times.
Oh, that's really interesting. Actually, I'm looking at the photo right now, and it's terrible, but because I haven't checked out the cast list alternately, I'm assuming that Alexander Kuznetsov plays Andre. So the young character Matvey is Vitaly Kayev, and the the image that they've used to publicise the film is Matt Vey.
Yeah.
And it's very like an image of Ewan McGregor from Trainspotting.
Yeah, well, there's that as well. And it's in the carpet as well.
Yeah. It's reminding me of the kind of the bad trip sequence in Trainspotting.
Yeah, when he sinks into the carpet.
Yeah. So, so I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, so that was a really good one.
Yeah.
So the next one is Artik.
You ask yourself questions like, is the common denominator me all these times?
When alcohol, for me, was the people that used it that made me toxic. I've always found myself gravitating toward chaos.
Afraid of strangers, kid?
You just gotta be careful out here doing this.
A big farm right there, is that you?
This process that we talk about, do you think it's possible to get someone out of it while they're in it?
He's a boy. He's a good kid, but it seems like there's some broken support beams at home.
I'm gonna give you a countdown. I want you to come down on it as hard as you can. You hear me, boy? 3, 2, 1. Something drew us here.
Not here with the wolves, huh?
Always bringing trash in here.
You are not a hero. You're gonna have to forgive me for what's coming.
Wait!
We're gonna play a little game. You're gonna pretend that your life isn't already over.
This is an American movie written and directed by Tom Bocci. It was his first film, and he was actually present to talk about it at the screening. And I will read the plot synopsis. A comic book obsessed serial killer teaches his son how to get away with murder until the boy befriends a mysterious man, Holton, who threatens to expose their horrifying family secret. As Holton gets closer to the truth, he must not only fight for the young boy's life, but for his own. Stella, I think you've got feelings on this movie, so I'll let you kick this one off.
I do. This was my least favourite film of the day.
Mine too.
I think it just missed the mark on so many points, so I've got extensive notes.
Right.
So it's my least favourite, first of all. So this guy, Artik, is a serial killer. But if he's a serial killer, we don't see nearly enough kills at all. It's alluded to that he's a serial killer. He's got some heads in his garden.
We see the first scene of the film, he's attending to a bunch of heads. That he's, or whole bodies maybe, that he's buried in the garden and just left the heads visible. Yeah,
but I don't think there's enough of the serial killer side of him.
Well, I think you only see him kill 2 other people in the film.
And so comic book obsessed serial killer, there's not enough killings. I do love a serial killer, but not in a dodgy way. I do love comics, again, not in a dodgy way, and I just think there could have been so much more done with the fact that he was obsessed with comic books. And the only thing it seemed that it did do with the serial killer who's obsessed with comic books was that he was quoting comic books every now and then, and when he did quote the prose from comic books, he was delivering it like it was poetry almost, and I think it didn't fit with that guy's demeanour or the way that he was. I don't think he didn't speak like that generally, but then when he was quoting from The Dark Knight at one point, one of the Batman comics, I just felt it just stuck out in the script so much. It was just like there was just thrown in there for the sake of being in there. The do-gooder, Holton, was profoundly irritating. So he's straight edge or teetotaler, and there's no explanation in the movie about what straight edge is, where it comes from culturally. At the start, the character Holton is in a workshop and there's some vaguely punky music on in the background. He's got some terrible fake tattoos on him. And it just comes across as such a dull... You've all met this kind of person. They're just so worthy and dull. And it's not reflective at all what any sort of the straight edge or hardcore punk scene is actually about. So our hero Holton is a dull, boring person, and he takes it upon himself, or is it the counsellor who goes around with the drawing? I can't remember. Well, they both merged into one boring person.
Yeah, it is. It's the counsellor who goes around because Holton has shown him the drawing. Holton befriends this boy who is the son, presumably, of Artik.
Yeah.
And the son shows him drawings. And what we should probably mention, it doesn't make it clear in the summary, is that Artik's comic book obsession extends to actually drawing his own comic book, which you never see that much of.
He's trying to make his own comic book.
And he seems to be the main character in it as well. And his son has started drawing him, and it's clearly him.
Yeah.
You know, big, hulking, bearded, long-haired guy. And he shows that to Holton, and Holton shows it to his friend, the counsellor of Al-Anon, who decides that the best thing to do with this information is to just go around to their house and say, I found these drawings and I'm worried about your son's state of mind.
And you're bad parents, and they are bad parents. I think what you mentioned there about the comic book stuff, it would have been better if it was a serial killer creating a comic book through, and writing a comic book about his own actions as a serial killer. That would have been great. But they didn't do that. They just had a load of irritable characters that I didn't care about. I wouldn't have minded if Holton did get tortured to death. The counsellor gets a fork through the jaw, which is good. A good bit of visual
It's a good
gore.
bit of practical gore. Well done, yeah.
Yeah, but I just didn't care about any of the characters, and the delivery, the use of comic book quotes was so clumsy, and the apparently hidden references to comic books was not hidden at all. So there was direct prose used, Holton's terrible temporary tattoos.
Right.
I think they were Tank Girl's tattoos, and he had patches on his jacket that were just... So that the rest of him was quite sort of greasy and oily because he works in some sort of workshop, so he was quite a grubby character, and then he had this jacket with these pristine white patches on that were referencing comic books, and it was just like you being slapped in the face with these comic book references that were neither intelligent nor hidden in the plot.
I feel I should explain that the director and I think the producer or one of the producers was there, and they did a little intro at the stars of the film saying, see if you can spot all the references. Yeah. And me being a dunderhead, the only one I spotted really was there's a Spider-Man comic that you can see. He's always reading comics, and you can't clearly see what comics they are, but there is one shot where you could see that it was Spider-Man.
You see like the top corner of a Spider-Man comic. Yeah. But it just, I wasn't excited by this film.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm getting that impression. So I think I can throw a slight amount of contrast to you. I didn't like a lot of this movie, but I was not bored by the experience of watching it. I found it okay. Maybe I was focusing on things that particularly charmed me about it. Like the fact that the character Holton, you describe him as one-dimensional and boring, which he was, but he was a member... I just thought it was interesting, because you don't see it in movies often, and the director did say this after the show. Holton actually goes to Al-Anon, which is not an organisation that you see in movies or TV much. You see Alcoholics Anonymous a lot, but... the fact that it was Al-Anon instead just struck me as like, oh, okay. Although I couldn't quite get a handle on him, because the way I read his dress and things, his clothes, was that he was some kind of... Well, like you described him as like a punk. Yeah. I thought he was maybe in a band or something, but the film doesn't really tell you anything about his life outside this Al-Anon group that he goes to.
Outside sticking his nose into other people's business.
And so he... Yeah, exactly. And he... the other thing in his life is he hangs around and makes friends with young boys, apparently.
And that's fine, apparently.
Yeah, and then he gets given this drawing by this boy, finds it a bit disturbing, and takes it to the leader of the Al-Anon group, who, he's a character who I felt sympathy for when he'd done the unbelievable action of going to the house of potential abusers and just confronting them. And maybe I liked him just because he's that specific character type, the leader of an Al-Anon group, you don't see in movies a lot. Yeah, when he was introduced, he's delivering kind of platitudes, like self-help platitudes to the group. I kind of thought, he's a bit character designed to establish the fact that this is a group that the guy goes to. He's not going to become a main character, but then he is the only other significant character in Holton's circle that you get to know. Sorry, I said that I was going to be kind of positive about this, didn't I? What I did like about him was that he's played by an actor called Chase Williamson, who just reminded me a lot of a young Michael Biehn. So I just enjoyed looking at him, and he's wearing like these tattered punkish clothes that remind me a little bit of the kind of tattered clothes that Biehn wears in The Terminator, for instance, and stuff like that. So I just kind of enjoyed that. I thought his performance was fine as well. But, you know, like you say, the character is a bit kind of one note.
He was.
And Artik himself, the killer, he is played by an actor called Jerry G. Angelo, who's also the producer of the film. And it's always worth producing a movie when you can give yourself like the co-lead or something like that.
Well, why wouldn't you?
I mean, and he is quite big and quite menacing. I'm not sure what part of the US the film is set in. It says here that it was filmed in New Mexico. But he's got a kind of Minnesota accent. You know, he reminded me a bit of like Fargo or something like that. I've just... The places that I've heard those accents, but other people in the film didn't seem to have that accent, so I don't know.
It did have that sort of out in the sticks hillbilly thing going on.
Yes, I mean, and that was another thing which, I mean, immediately, maybe I fought too hard to not instantly dislike this film, just because I think that kind of hillbilly horror is a bit easy to lean on, and it reminds me of like Rob Zombie's Halloween films, which I'm not a fan of particularly. And it was doing that, maybe it was set in slightly a different part of the USA, but it was still doing that trope. Of
I mean, well, now you've said that, I wonder if I went into it wanting too much, because I saw the words comic book obsessed serial killer and got really, really excited, because it was like, oh, it's a combination of two of my favourite things. Yeah. And I didn't feel like it did anything with those things.
No, I agree.
So, you know, I thought I was getting a serial killer movie, and I wasn't. Yeah. And that's not what it delivered.
Yeah, it was just like a fairly basic slasher film. I distinguish slasher from serial killer.
Sure. Oh, right, yeah.
So it had a certain amount of violence, not a lot intellectually going on. And
could say torture porn as well, because there's people strapped to chairs.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those movies live or die on whether you care for or even just like watching the protagonist. Yeah. And I was there going, he looks like Michael Biehn. That's all right. If this was actually Michael Biehn, I'd probably sit and watch that film. You know? So therefore, it was okay. And it's well enough made, you know, it looks and sounds nice enough, and I thought the performances were okay throughout. But yeah, I think the very interesting idea of the comic book obsessed serial killer, the movie doesn't really do anything with.
Not enough.
There was a lot of lines where he was talking generally about these heroes in these kind of comic books, and I thought, which particular heroes are you talking about? Give us some detail, exactly what has offended you, or do you wish to correct? So I wasn't quite sure what Artik's project was, in that, you know, yes, he wanted to kill people, but what was he? I didn't think it was clear whether he thought he was a hero in some way by killing these people, or whether he was testing them to see if they were heroes. It's like, and if you survive being hammered to death, then you are a superhero. But if not, then you're obviously not. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, I'll try again next time. Yeah. And
see, flimsy. I've got the word flimsy written here. The film was flimsy.
Yes, essentially. And considering that the film does kind of make a certain amount of visual play of his drawings, you should have understood more about what he was constructing or where it was going. Instead, he just seemed to be drawing himself a lot in menacing situations.
Oh, well.
Maybe they were afraid of getting sued if they talked about specific heroes and characters. But I think they could have been a bit bolder and gone with that, because having a character in your film talk about a fictional character doesn't mean that you're using that fictional character necessarily. But at the same time, you know, we live in a world where comic book movies dominate the box office, and maybe smaller filmmakers are scared of, you know, you won't want to take on Disney. No. You won't want to annoy Disney's lawyers. And I think you could tell in the little talk that Tom Bocci did after. Well, it's not like you could tell. It's not like you could define it. He outwardly said, I hate comic book movies.
I know.
He didn't say I love comic books but hate comic book movies, which is what you'd kind of expect him to make that qualification, since he did write this movie inspired by comic books, supposedly inspired by comic books.
And for the record, I love the MCU.
Right. No, for the record, I do too. Recently, like Martin Scorsese came out and said they're not real movies. Yeah. I can understand people saying that, actually. I think filmmakers resent them because they're so CG heavy. There's green screen everywhere. I mean, if you've seen like any behind the scenes footage, it's just an actor standing on a green screen, not even often in full costume.
Yeah, like Iron Man, for instance. Yeah.
Even the costume is put on afterwards. And you can imagine filmmakers going, what did I go to film school for?
Yeah.
And I think, and Tom Bocciato, he did say, I worked with some of those guys once, and he seemed quite bitter about it.
The humble brag there as well.
Well, yeah, that's true, absolutely. Oh yeah, my final thought about connected with this really is that it made me want to see Joker, which I haven't seen.
I've not seen it yet, and I've seen people either loving it or hating it.
I've seen both. Well, actually, critics, a lot of them seem to hate it, but like my friend Tim, who's who you know and who's been on this podcast before when we talked about Star Wars films, he really loved it.
Right.
And said, don't listen to the haters, go and see it. But in a way, I would like to see it and compare it to Artik. That's why I thought once I'd seen Artik, because I kind of thought they're both examples of movies that kind of use a connection to comic books, but actually they want to do something else. And is there a good way to do that? Or does it just compromise the film, which is what I think it did with Artik?
Yeah.
And they're both from directors who kind of came out and explicitly criticised other comic book or genre movies, which you instantly take against, because it's like they're trying to make their films seem superior.
Sure.
So I haven't seen Todd Phillips' Joker, so I can't express any criticism of that, but I just hope it's better than Artik. I think that's the final thing I'd like to say on that.
Yeah. What final thing would I say about Artik? Don't bother.
Right. Okay. Well, this was the UK premiere of the film, by the way, and I think it probably won't get many other screenings, but it will probably turn up on the Horror Channel.
Yeah, probably.
Soon. I can imagine.
So, Extraordinary.
Why don't we see ghosts every day?
Oh, leave me alone.
Most hauntings are so small, they go unnoticed.
Hi, this is Rose's driving school.
Maybe you could have a chat with my daughter, just to find out what's up with her. My name is Martin.
Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. Martin, she's floating. She's floating, Martin.
I know.
What is evil?
Coming, my sweet. I'm doing an incantation. Now! Hear me, powers of the night! The blood moon is nigh!
This bloody moon better make me bloody rich.
Yes. This is a satanic ritual.
Satanists? I woke up in the morning.
To break the spell, we need ectoplasm. You just have to let the ghost inhabit your body.
Like in Ghostbusters.
Oh, I haven't read that.
The plot thickens. Why does it have to be so unnecessarily gross?
Black magic! Aha! Your girl's got something.
Prick.
Holy s***! Black magic!
This is over. Hello, little ghost lady.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were dead.
So, can you give us the story of this one?
Lonely driving instructor Rose is gifted with supernatural abilities, but doesn't regard them as much of a gift due to constant spirit-related requests from neighbours to exercise their possessed rubbish bins or haunted gravel. But when Christian Winter, a washed-up one-hit wonder rock star, makes a pact with the devil for a return to greatness, Rose has to find the heroine within.
So there's a plot. That's quite a unique one.
Yes.
So this is an Irish film. Well, it's according to this, it's a Belgian-Irish co-production. Written and directed by Micah Hearn and Enda Loughman. And Micah Hearn was at Grimmfest with his wife, I think Claudia O'Doherty, who's in the film. I'll just say straight off, I loved this movie. This is possibly my favourite of the day. Even though maybe Why Don't You Just Die it was a better film.
Yes.
This is the one that I would champion and recommend to people. Maybe because it's British as well.
It's British.
I'd really urge people to go see it, and I've been recommending it to family members all week.
Yeah.
I found it was a really charming, funny, not at all horror film, supernatural comedy. And there's a few of those in history, Ghostbusters, The Frighteners.
Yeah.
It's a rare genre, really, but it's a nice one, and this one works really well and feel good as well.
It's a lovely film. It was funny, really, really funny. I think I'm always a bit wary of something being a comedy. So if I'm going to go to the cinema, I'd rarely go and watch a comedy.
Sure.
Because I think it's very easy to mess it up.
Yeah.
But in this one, I think the director said, didn't he, that they wrote it with Maeve Higgins in mind, and she plays the lead, Rose.
Yes, and she is
a comedian.
Some of the scripts as well.
And she wrote some of the scripts as well, and she plays it beautifully. Everyone, all the cast, is superbly acted. I would give a special shout out to who plays the widower. Is that Barry Ward?
That's Barry Ward.
Barry Ward. So when he slips into his wife's character, it's absolutely wonderful, just wonderful. And I think everyone in the cinema watched the whole thing with a big fat smile on their face.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The mood in the room was enjoyed.
It's
It was
just great.
Lovely. And yeah, just to clarify, Barry Ward plays this character whose wife recently died and is still haunting his house. And at points in the film, she possesses his body suddenly, and has
a cigarette appears.
Yes, this wonderful device where you can, whenever he's possessed, the cigarette is suddenly in his mouth and he's talking with a cigarette between his lips, and it's just great. It is not in any way a serious movie about supernatural happenings or anything, but equally I would say it's got more heart than it's not like a Naked Gun style gag fest where they just do everything they can to be funny. It's kind of quite disciplined. There's kind of period specific humour in it, like it's set in the early 2000s. The director explicitly said that because they didn't want any smartphones in it. But also there's a number of flashbacks to the early 80s when the character of Rose was growing up and her father was like a TV psychic, and he sold videos on supernatural topics, and there are clips that you see throughout of these videos, very authentic looking VHS. Kind of infotainment type videos with guides to where you can find ghosts in your everyday life and things like that.
Those clips put me in mind of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Yes.
Very much so. That's that early 80s, very Stephen King-esque. Everything's haunted.
Yes.
The world is a scary place, but done with such seriousness.
Yeah. Well, or deadpan quality.
Yeah.
It's like he's not trying to overly scare you, but he's very serious about the importance of what he's saying. It's kind of things that you can't help but laugh at, like the idea of a small ghost. I think the director said he was really tickled by the idea of like a small ghost. So small items can be haunted. Like there's haunted gravel. In
the toaster.
Yes, there's a toaster that like keeps waving its plug around. It's just sitting on a pavement next to a pile of rubbish, and you see repeatedly.
There's a haunted wheelie bin as well. That keeps flapping open.
And what it reminded me of, in a funny way, this might be quite an obscure reference, but Matt Berry does a series that's on the BBC iPlayer called Matt Berry Does.
Right.
And it's like little monologues which are written by Bob Mortimer.
Right.
Just on a different topic every time, and they just use kind of obviously free of copyright stock footage to illustrate the points.
That sounds great.
There's one episode called Matt Berry Does Ghosts, and basically he has this mad monologue about where you can find ghosts in the UK. So UK ghosts have been known for decades. And it just kind of really reminded me of that, but then does something which a little format like that could never do, which is bring in characters and a story that you care about.
Yeah.
And keep you with it all the way through. I
Yeah.
mean, the villain in the movie is a tax-avoiding failed rock star played by Will Ford.
One-hit wonder.
There's quite a lot of scenes which are just him and his wife and what they're doing. And obviously he's kind of the villain of the film, but you don't not enjoy those scenes.
Yeah.
And there's a charm to everything about it, I think.
Utterly charming, for sure. And the final sort of shakedown at the end where they get out the special effects, basically, is just... the whole thing's just lovely.
It's really
like, we're sat here talking about it now, we're both grinning like idiots.
Yeah, I'd see it again.
I'd definitely watch it again.
I was glad to hear that it's getting a release, because I might go along and take some friends.
Yeah.
It's definitely a film to see with a crowd as well.
Oh, for sure, for the proper belly laughs that you got. It wasn't just giggles, it was belly laugh.
And that actress stroke comedian, Maeve Higgins, she's just great. And I want to check out more of her stuff.
Look at some of her other work. For sure.
It was just a breath of fresh air.
It really, really was. After Artik.
It just came at the right time, didn't it?
It did. I was definitely flagging. So this Extraordinary was on at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
So we've already been there for 10 hours.
Good heavens. So, yeah.
Yeah. So go watch Extraordinary if you can.
No, despite the fact that we were 10 hours down and energy was low, that film lifted us right up. So
it did.
I would hugely recommend that. So on to our final film of the day. Not the final film in the festival that day, but the final film we saw because we had to leave early. And possibly my favourite title of the day, which is The Shed.
The Shed.
I have to tell you something. There's something in the shed. It wants to kill me.
Are you kidding me?
Dharma, I swear to God, there's something inside.
All right, then show me. Let me see your pet monster. Dude, don't you see what this means? We can use this. This is power.
What?
Nobody's ever gonna mess with us again.
Are you crazy?
Think about it. It's not murder, it's payback.
This is not a gift or a weapon. This is dangerous.
I'm supposed to be your best friend. Look what they did to me this time.
What the hell is happening?
Dharma, what's inside that shed?
Get in.
What's inside that shed?
Say it like it is.
Written and directed by Frank Sabatella, an American film. I'll give you the plot outline. As an orphan living with his abusive grandfather, life sucks for Stan. But he's got it better than his best friend Donma, who regularly needs defending against the school bullies. When Stan discovers a murderous creature has taken refuge inside his tool shed, he tries to battle the demon alone until Donma comes up with a far more sinister plan.
Just realised that it's called Donma. Through the whole thing, I thought it was being called Dharma.
Well,
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Well, and somebody...
I thought that's an unfortunate surname.
Well, it did sound like that, and somebody did put the hand up at the end because you had to leave before the Q&A, didn't you? But someone in the audience did ask the director, who was there, obviously, otherwise they couldn't have asked him. They said, "Do you name that character Dharma for a reason?" And the director said yes. He said, because the character of Donma is kind of unhinged.
I've got a lot to say about that.
Okay, but I'm not sure that he was deliberately named that. The director said yes, but he said, but I changed the spelling to just take it away from that.
Right.
But I think that might have been his way of realising that, this guy has misunderstood the name, so I'll just say yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that was not his intention at all. I don't know. I suspect that's the case.
Yeah.
So what did you think of this film, Stella?
Well, I think overall, I did enjoy it. I think it was good to see vampires being monstrous as opposed to sexy.
Yes, because what that summary does not point out is that it's a vampire.
Yeah, it's a vampire.
That ends up in the shed.
And they're horrible, and they want to eat you, as opposed to they want to romance you.
Seduce you, yeah. And scary.
And scary. They were scary. I mean, they were idiots.
Right.
Vampires were idiots, I think.
You mean in this film or just generally?
In this film.
Right, okay.
I mean, generally. Yeah.
Well, because the film starts with the character running from a vampire creature, and the character gets bitten, and becomes the vampire, I guess.
Turns quite quickly, doesn't it?
But what it makes it look like, the way it's shot, and I don't want to get off to a point of criticising this film, because I did leave a lot into it, but it was almost like the vampire bit him and then died. I know because the sun came out and it like vapourises.
Like a bumblebee.
Like a bumblebee. So yeah, it's like I live to just bite and pass on the infection, and then. But later in the film, that's not the case for the new vampire. He obviously bites lots of people and attacks lots of people. But I think what you get from that is you create this character who's kind of pathetic, because the first thing you see them doing is running away and hiding. But a lot of characters who are scared are themselves frightening because of the lengths they will go to. And at the end of the day, this is a movie about a monster trapped in a shed, and he can't step outside the shed because vampires are allergic to sunlight. But
so they should remain. Don't need to sparkle.
Yeah, well, yes, I hear things about that. I've not got an official position on that yet, but and I like the fact that he's trapped in this shed in a kind of pathetic position, but also if you step in the shed, you're dead. It's very dangerous with the character, and I think the film has that tension quite well. But sorry, I haven't got all of your thoughts yet.
I thought the dream sequences were good.
All right.
Stan's dream sequences where he first dreamt of his mother and father.
Oh yeah, well it's a dream sequence that introduces you to him, isn't it really? Because you don't realise it's a dream sequence.
And those bits had some nice jump scares in, some decent ones. The school life and the vampire threat sort of double storytelling, when we've seen it before in Buffy.
Sure. I
didn't find the school life stuff as fluffy as you did. I didn't really mind the school bits. And then his friend, Donma, who ended up waving a gun around to finally get his own back on the bullies, I think was sort of emulating America's problems with school shooters.
Right, yeah.
And I did have a bit of a problem with that, but only because in research that I've been doing anyway into school shooters, which is quite a depressing topic,
sure.
And the stereotypical idea of shooters being loners and being victims of bullying. In the research that I've done, it's not actually the case.
Okay.
It's not cases of kids who basically there's more going on than being bullied or something that we've not got time for here. So I found the lad who snaps because of bullying and then starts waving a gun around even and putting the gun in his friend's face. I thought that was a bit lazy, maybe, to just to quickly turn a bullied kind of downtrodden lad into, well, now he's prepared to start shooting.
Yeah.
Which I found stuck in my throat a little bit, but that's only because, as I said, the research that I have been doing into actual school shooters and the motives behind them and what happens. Apart from that, the only criticism I had was I thought the end went on for a bit too long.
Okay.
Even though I'm looking here and it was only 86 minutes, it felt longer than that, but maybe that was because it was the end of a long day.
Well, yeah, because it ends up being, it suddenly turns into a kind of different film at the end, where it's no longer in the shed.
It's a bit zombie-like at the end, isn't it? Barricading themselves in.
It's characters fighting off multiple vampires by the end in a house. Yeah, in a way it becomes a more standard kind of horror movie. It more so becomes the kind of thing you've seen before.
Yeah, it's got the montage of them barricading the windows and hammering wood across doors and looking for weapons and.
Yeah, we noted that because that was more hammer.
Another
used.
hammer.
It wasn't actual hammer related violence. It was just hammer being used as a hammer.
Yeah.
But still, we were hammered out by that point. I mean. Yeah, I mean, well, I enjoyed it. My biggest criticism of it really was, as you alluded to, the school stuff. I just thought that was a bit. I've seen this plenty of times.
Yeah,
I thought it was okay. You mentioned Buffy in terms of linking supernatural horror to school life, and Buffy did that with great elan every week for many years.
Yeah. All praise Buffy.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Good heavens. They're on the verge of announcing what the reboot sequel is going to be, and I'll be quite interested. Yeah, so I think if you do that stuff, you've got to do it very well, and in particular. I mean, for instance, do you know the movie Ginger Snaps?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think that was a great example of a movie that came out at the same time as Buffy, and it did a lot of similar things to Buffy, but it had enough of a twist on it, its own vision, for it to be completely worthwhile as its own thing, whereas this was more kind of like the horror stuff. the use of the shed as a focus of suspense, the kind of mechanics around that. There's a great bit where somebody kind of realises that it's a vampire and therefore it's allergic to sunlight. So you just
allergic.
Well, yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, that's what vampires.
Yeah,
they're allergic.
They're allergic.
If they just had antihistamines with them
They
all
just
the
need
time,
an
they'd be
EpiPen.
fine. Yeah. So they just start shooting holes in the shed so that the daylight gets into the shed.
Mm-hmm.
There's just bits like that. Because I remember for a certain amount of time I was screaming at the thing in my mind.
In your mind.
Just burn the shed down.
That's what I was thinking. Just bulldoze the shed.
Yeah, it's fine but they did get to that point, sort of.
Yeah.
I don't think it fully ran with it.
Mm-mm.
But all that stuff was quite well done. But then the school stuff I thought was just just kind of rote.
Yeah.
And I think, as with most school things, the actors tend to look in their late 20s.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And that's fine. I mean, that was true of Buffy as well.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that the industry works. It's too difficult to employ really young actors, accurately aged, to play those roles because of supervision issues and all that.
And if you do, you get in trouble.
But I think...
Or can do.
Yeah, but I think that because you've got this instant visual thing of it doesn't quite look right, it doesn't quite feel right, the writing and performances have really got to be on it to convince you of that world, and if they're not, it's just a bit... and that's kind of how I felt, really.
Yes.
But I do think that I enjoyed it. I think the cast were all good. The vampire creature was actually played by Frank Whaley, who's in films like Field of Dreams and things like that. It's one of those. I mean, I recognised him, but without knowing where from, And I think he's quite good because he didn't look like a kind of he's not the vampire guy from Fright Night or one of those kind of impressive looking vampire creatures. He was more in the tradition of like Reginald or in Salem's Lot kind of thing, and all the more menacing for it, I thought. He also had a nice cameo by Timothy Bottoms as Stan's granddad.
Yes.
And he's really good.
He's really good at playing an absolute arsehole.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Let's just say he doesn't make it all the way through the film.
Yeah.
I won't say any more than that. And also, I did like the director, Frank Sabatella, when he came out to talk about it at the end. And they did make a point of asking him, what's next for you? And he was a bit vague about what his upcoming projects are, but I think there was enough invention and focus in this that I'd like to see him. Frank, what would you do with a werewolf movie? Just give him a different kind of genre.
Give him a different monster.
There's two other things I just want to mention about it. I like the way the Grimmfest programme describes this movie as essentially being Salem's Shed.
Salem's Shed, yeah.
Which is that's fair enough. And also, Frank Sabatella did say that one of his main influences was Ferris Bueller's Day Out. Because there's a scene in the movie...
An awesome movie.
Where, one of those 80s iconic kind of classics, And I think in this movie there is a scene where Stan has to run home from school before the cops get to home, and it keeps intercutting. Yeah. So someone specifically put their hand up and said, was that inspired by the running scene in Ferris Bueller? And he said yes, basically.
Did everyone cheer?
It was well received.
Yeah.
So, and John Hughes is always like a good... If you're going to make a teen movie, then
you watch them
John
ones
Hughes.
first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good inspiration.
For sure.
And because you're always going to get compared to them anyway, so you might as well draw from them. So yeah, no, I really liked it, and it was a nice end to the day, I thought.
Yeah, definitely.
And I hope he does. He does more. I'll tell you what, maybe this is my personal feelings as a sometimes filmmaker, sometimes actor, but I just noticed how can I say this delicately, how old Frank Sabatella was. He looks in his 50s, and he's making his debut teen movie now, and it's like, what are you doing next, Frank? And he should be going, retiring. But he's actually, he's at the beginning of his career. He's probably worked his way up through being a clapper boy and all for many years and all that. So
it's never too late. That's what we've learned.
Absolutely. Well, look, Ridley Scott is still directing and making a mess of things in his 80s. So, there's hope for everyone. It's fine.
Diddly squat there.
It was
Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott. Diddly squat instead.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So you don't want to get me started.
Right.
So thank you so much, Stella. Hopefully we'll do this again next year.
Yeah.
So
that was Grimm 2019.
Nice one to the organisers, Simeon Halligan and Steve Bolshaw, who were both there for putting together another fun programme. We'll be here next year. I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah, me too.
Hello again. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. Just a bit of information about how you can obtain some of these movies which haven't been released yet fully in the UK at the time of the recording. So our two favourite movies that we talked about are luckily now more accessible in the UK. So Kirill Sokolov's Russian horror thriller Why Don't You Just Die is now available to rent for home viewing in the UK. So you can either buy it on Blu-ray or you can rent it on VOD from places like Amazon.co.uk. And my personal favourite of the films we saw, Enda Loughman and Micah Hearn's Irish supernatural comedy Extraordinary, is currently available on Netflix in the UK. So do give it a watch because it's fantastic.
That's on my list, my watch list on Netflix. I have to say.
Brilliant. It should be on everybody's watch list. It's great. I'm meaning to get around to watching it again myself. It's just so sunny. But also, I don't know if you've seen the trailer for the film, Kirsty, but it's just nice and unusual to have a movie come along that has something in the trailer which they've had to kind of mosaic out of the picture so you can't see it.
Okay. Oh no, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody, so you know, and somebody in the edit suite was like putting that trailer together and going, "We can't show this thing. Should we just not have that scene in the trailer?" And somebody else went, "No, just blur it out. It'll be fine." It's great fun. So now we come to our traditional end bit where we talk about any recommendations we have of horror for this week. Kirsty, do you mind if I ask you to go first?
Not at all, not at all. I only have two actually, and they're linked. And they're linked not only to each other, but probably also to our earlier discussion of devs. In that the first one is a horror, science fiction horror. So I'm going to recommend this week Under the Skin, Jonathan Glazer's 2013, kind of horror sci-fi, starring Scarlett Johansson. It's currently available on Amazon Prime, and I love this film. It is, again, one of those films that kind of is slightly unexpected in terms of what it is. The kind of conceit is that Scarlett Johansson is an alien in Glasgow. You can imagine the pitch meeting for that one. And
I'm sold already.
Yeah. So it's got these kind of quite again dreamlike, kind of very kind of aesthetic sequences of kind of horror. It's quite emotionally challenging and disturbing in places, but it's all about this kind of alien's sort of journey towards humanity. And the kind of things that happen to it. It's one of those very kind of, it's an assaulting film in a range of different ways. But it has this kind of quietness about it. It also, the score was done by Misha Levi, and it is one of the most, I think, well done horror scores that I've ever heard. Just the kind of theme is just enough to make me sort of slightly contract my internal organs.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a really interesting film. And if you've not seen it, Dan, I would strongly recommend it.
I haven't seen it. I've been meaning to watch it for many a year. So.
But some interesting kind of things about the kind of production of it. So the first part of the movie is Scarlett Johansson in a white van driving around Glasgow, and she's not, it's clearly Scarlett Johansson, but not in a way that you would necessarily recognise kind of off the top of your head, particularly if you were in Glasgow. Sure. So what they did is they set up hidden cameras in the cab. So she kind of goes around, she, kind of gives, people lifts. And there's a sense that for some of them, though not all, I might add, that they don't know it's Scarlett Johansson they're interacting with.
Right.
Which kind of adds this sort of whole, again, a kind of slightly uncanny level to the film. So it's a sort of blend of, because of that sort of British social realism as well. So it's an interesting film. And then my linked choice from that is actually available on Mubi, if you have access to Mubi, though I'm sure you can find it at other places. So Jonathan Glazer last year released a short film, a horror short called The Fall, which is only 7 minutes. And it's a very atmospheric, disturbing and ambiguous piece where a man is kind of cruelly tortured by a group of people in the woods at night, and they're all wearing masks. It's very atmospheric. It doesn't have a huge amount of story per se, but it's deeply unsettling and has something of it's kind of Murakami-esque as well. Yes. So those are my two recommendations. So they're both by Jonathan Glazer. One is a short and one is a feature.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'll just ask you a question. Remind me what else the music composer has done that you mentioned.
Well, so she is more kind of an experimental kind of artist. She often goes under the name of Mikachu. But she also did the music for The Fall. So, such as it is, again, it's more kind of tonal rather than, kind of melodic. But she's also done the score for, I'm just looking up now, did the score for another film, which I can't find the name for at the moment. Jackie in 2016.
Oh, okay.
And also Monos in 2019, it says. But honestly, just the score for Under the Skin is just, it's fantastic if you are into scores,
right.
Which I am kind of increasingly, I think.
That's a fulsome recommendation. Okay, great. Just because you mentioned short films, I didn't mention earlier, and I know I'd mentioned it on one of our earlier episodes, but Grimmfest has a YouTube channel where you get lots of the horror shorts that, they premiered at their festival. That's Grimmfest TV. I think if you go to the Grimmfest website, which is grimmfest.com, I think, or if you just go to YouTube and type in Grimmfest, you'll find it, and there's some really interesting short films available there. And also that's the place to go if you would like to donate any money to Grimmfest, because they're an organisation which deserves continuing support, especially at the moment when they can't put on any events, and therefore I think people are starting to think maybe by October cinemas will be open again, so maybe we could have things like festivals, but it's obviously very uncertain at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, that the bigger festivals are moving, aren't they, more towards kind of online hosting. So I like this, like the Cannes Film Festival is doing some online content this year, and I think South by Southwest and what was the other one? They got together with somebody else and then hosted some stuff online. Might have been Sundance, I don't know. Right. So I think that but it's the kind of, whilst they can do that, one of the functions of film festivals is to find distribution, isn't it, for independent films. It's probably harder to do.
Sure.
Yeah, it's great if you're a film fan because you get access to all the stuff that you wouldn't, unless you're prepared to go to wherever these, things are being held, you wouldn't necessarily see. But I think for distributors, it's slightly more difficult. So, yeah,
yes.
We'll see.
Hopefully the industry will just continue to adapt, because at the moment, I suppose that it's not only that you can't find the distributors, but they haven't really got many places to distribute to.
No.
So maybe everything's going to become streamlined for a while. Let's hope so anyway. So my recommendations for this week, I've got a few, because last week we were at this point in the show and we were running out of recording time, so I just said BBC iPlayer, and that was it. I'll go into a little bit more detail now. The collection of movies on BBC iPlayer is quite weird in that, there are the films that are on TV this week and they'll appear on the iPlayer for a week or so and then go away. But there's also a number of films which just seem to always be there, and or certainly are there for months at a time. So for the moment, for instance, there's quite a few notable horror films that have just been there for ages, and I've checked, and they're going to continue to be there for months. So you've got Cat People from 1943, which is a classic.
Yeah.
and I Walked with a Zombie and The Curse of the Cat People, which were all made around the same time by most of the same people. Great movies. Night of the Living Dead, the original George A. Romero version, is on there.
Okay.
The Relic from 1997, which is not a great movie, but I remember enjoying, is on there permanently, it seems. Paranormal Activity, which I've never seen, but is obviously a kind of key part of the found footage procession of horror movies, is on there. And also, what I think is one of the best horror movies of this decade, or the decade just finished, is It Follows, and I think that's hanging around on there as well. So
okay, I've not seen that one.
Oh, it's really good.
Okay.
It's got a fantastic musical score. It's kind of a reverse slasher movie, in that it takes the kind of trope from slasher movies, which kind of goes all the way back to Halloween, I suppose, whether intentionally or not. I mean, I argue in our episode about Halloween that they didn't mean for it to communicate that. But the trope that you have sex and you die in a horror movie, whereas the plot is basically that this demon attaches itself to people, and the only way that they can get rid of it is to pass it on through sexual contact with someone else, and it's like a sexually transmitted disease then, so the demon then fixates on the other person. That's the setup, which you learn within the first few minutes. But the way it explores it is really great. The film's aesthetically very interesting. It's kind of art directed to be set in a strange, timeless kind of suburban America that's somewhere between the 1950s and now. Like, people are watching black and white TVs in it, but they also have, smartphones, or maybe one character has like a makeup compact, which is also like a small television.
Oh, okay.
I think, if I remember correctly. The music, which is by a combo called Disaster Piece, is a fantastic kind of slightly 80s synth wave mood piece that's really great. So anybody who's not seen that, it's there on the iPlayer for free, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And it's hugely recommended. It's genuinely frightening in places. And for anyone who likes slasher movies but has got bored because of the repetitive nature of them, I mean, this kind of will feature a number of the things that you like about the slashers, like, the young characters and the high school setting, but then it does something very different with it. So yeah, that's probably my biggest recommendation out of the kind of permanent films on the iPlayer. But also, I just want to mention another movie from 2013, like Under the Skin, a British horror movie called The Borderlands.
Oh, yes. So I have seen this.
Oh, great.
Yes.
It's fantastic, I think.
It is. It's one of those that, didn't get much attention, did it? But it's actually very effective, isn't it? At sort of slightly reinterpreting some of those found footage tropes. And
it's really good.
Yeah. And the ending is just, wow.
it has a pretty incredible ending. And also, I think it's just great that for most of the film, it's basically a two-hander. It's these two actors. Gordon Kennedy is one of them, and I can't remember who the other guy is. But I know that I think he was a crew member on some of the Ben Wheatley films, and he's a cameraman. But they also kind of discovered that he could act, so he basically plays the cameraman in the film. He's handling the camera equipment, but he's also playing this character.
Yes. So is that Robin Hill?
Could be.
Who plays Grey? Yes, I'm just looking looking on IMDb.
And yeah, they've got great chemistry. You know, a lot of it is kind of improv scenes between these two guys, and it works as a character piece as well. But it's got a very nice sense of dread, and yeah, as you say, a great ending. And I might as well plug another podcast, even though they don't need me to plug them. But the Evolution of Horror podcast, if anybody listening to this hasn't heard that, there's a really good episode of that where they talk to the producer of the Borderlands, Jen Handorf, and she gives some really interesting insight into it, because it is a really good example of kind of extremely structured British horror filmmaking. You know, they clearly had very little money. I mean, she's the same producer as did Prevenge, by the way.
Oh, right, okay.
It's a really inventive piece, and it's only on iPlayer for a couple of weeks. It's not one of the ones that stays there, so listeners need to run to catch that one, and it's highly recommended. I just want to mention as well, I've bizarrely been looking at My5, the streaming service from the Channels 5, and just to see what kind of films they've got on there. And they've got millions of films.
Do they?
But they do, but most of them are either like Hallmark TV movies or, mockbusters from The Asylum.
Right.
So you've got like the Asylum version of Sherlock Holmes, and most thrillingly, you've got Titanic 2, starring Bruce Davison, which I think I might have to watch. That just is so ridiculous. But they do have a few cinematically released movies. They must have just struck some strange deals. Like they have quite a lot of Woody Allen films on there for some reason.
Well, yeah, and it might be to be with how Woody Allen is currently, viewed by
yes, exactly.
by the public.
Well, but they do have a trilogy of part British horror films that are quite notable, and the one that I've seen and that I recommend is Let Me In, the remake that we mentioned last week of Let the Right One In, starring Chloe Grace Moretz. I think it's alright. It's not as good as the original, but it's okay. And it's, like I say, it's partly British. It's made by Hammer, actually.
I was going to say, was it the first of the sort of new Hammer?
That's a bit vague, because I think during the late 2000s, they kept releasing films, but each time they billed it as the first new Hammer horror film.
Okay.
But then when it wasn't a big enough hit, they just ignored that and then moved on and called the next one the first. So another candidate for the first new Hammer horror film is on there as well, which is The Resident from 2011, I think, with Hilary Swank and Christopher Lee.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen that one. And also there's a movie called Triangle from 2009, which is, again, a British co-production starring Melissa George.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
I'm aware of it. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's actually very good. So I just wanted to mention that that's on there. So, very weird to have discovered My5, but it's something I'll keep my eye on, at least.
I mean, I'm only aware of My5 because it has endless episodes of Paw Patrol.
Oh, right, okay.
This is very important to my 4-year-old. If you want to talk about horror, just, a 4-year-old who only will watch Paw Patrol on endless loops. That's true horror.
Well, dear, oh dear. Well, I will disclose at this point that I have professionally in my life at points been a Santa Claus. So I've had conversations about Paw Patrol with literally hundreds of children. So I can kind of conceive where you're coming from there.
Yeah.
But I certainly know how important it is to the little people, bless them. So there we are. Hopefully we've provided our listeners with a ton of useful recommendations this week, because there was a lot there. Next week, Kirsty and I will be back, and we'll be talking about my recurrent obsession, which is the films of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, because soon on the podcast, Howard will be returning, my old partner in crime, and we'll be resuming our journey through the movies of those stars. So I thought it'd be nice for Kirsty and I to have a bit of a chat, and because Kirsty, I'd like to introduce you, or at least make comprehensible a little of our ongoing obsession with this body of work. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so I'm going to watch some in the meantime, so that I can at least have a vague sense of what you're talking to me about next week.
No, brilliant. No, I enjoy that. I enjoy the prospect of that very much. So that's fantastic. So, Kirsty, thank you so much once again this week.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks to Stella as well, who's obviously not here right now, but for lending her voice to the earlier segment. And thank you, listeners, for, listening. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, take care. Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, Stella Gaynor, and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism, in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law, and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages, @AndNowPod or @LeeCushingPod. Follow us on Twitter, @AndNowPodcast or @LeeCushingPodcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now, the podcast stops.